Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Adam Green here with NoMoreNews.org. It's September 16th, 2019, and today, joining me, a very special guest known as the Renegade, the Dot Connector. Undoubtedly one of the biggest names and legends in alternative media, Mr. David Icke himself. Welcome, David. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks, Adam. Real pleasure. You do some great work.
Thank you so much. That's a huge honor to hear that coming from you. I am so happy to have you on. This is one of the first interviews that you're doing for your brand new, excellent book, The Trigger, The Lie That Changed the World, Who Really Did It, and Why. I just finished a few days ago, despite having an advance copy. It's a huge book, and I say one of the most important books ever written. I hope everybody runs out and gets it and shares the information with everyone they know. Why don't you start by telling us a little bit about why you wrote the book and what people can expect to get out of it?
Well, I remember on September the 11th, 2001, being out walking in England, and someone told me what had happened. And immediately, obviously, I was away to see the news, to look at the detail, and immediately it struck me that there was something big time not right about this. And by then I'd understood the major technique that is used to manipulate people to accept vast changes in society that they wouldn't otherwise accept. And I gave it the name a long time ago now, problem, reaction, solution. Create the problem, get someone else to be blamed for it, not you. Get the mainstream media, no problem, to tell the public the version of the event, the problem that you want people to believe. And you want at stage two, the reaction from the public of do something, this can't go on, something must be done. You want the public in fear and outrage so that they will be open to a solution. And the solution to your manufactured problem, which you blame someone else for, is then to change society in ways that you would never have got away with without the manufactured problem. Problem, reaction, solution. It's played on us constantly, all the time. Another name for it in the alternative media is, of course, false flag. So I had a massive question mark from day one. And from that day, I started researching and investigating the background. And it led to a book I published in September 2002 called Alice in Wonderland and the World Trade Center Disaster, Why the Official Story of 9/11 is a Monumental Lie. And obviously, since then, I've kept my eye on developments as the years have passed. And I set out about just over a year ago to write an update to Alice in Wonderland, to bring it kind of up to date. And within 2 weeks, I thought, no, we're starting with a blank sheet of paper here because of the way the information was flowing and where it was taking me. And so I produced this book, which is basically two books, both of them fundamentally connected. The first half of the book demolishes the official story of 9/11, which, as you well know, is not the hardest thing ever to do, but most people don't hear the information. They only hear the mainstream version of it. So over the first half of the book, with a hell of a lot, I mean, in fact, masses of factual detail, the 9/11 official story is taken apart. And then in the second half of the book, I tell an amazing story, which eventually leads to who actually was behind it. And it wasn't 19 Islamic extremists, hijackers. It was a network that not only was responsible for 9/11, but right up to present day is responsible for what's happening in the world, all that's happened since 9/11, like the wars in the Middle East that have been justified by the trigger of 9/11. That's the reason for the name of the book, because 9/11 was a trigger that started a sequence of events that's still going on. This same network's responsible for 5G and the emerging smart grid to eventually connect the human mind, the human brain to artificial intelligence. So artificial intelligence becomes the human mind. So you can see, well, you know, having read it, that the trigger is a book about 9/11. It has 9/11 as its theme, but it's not only about 9/11. It's about the whole massive connection from those that were behind the horrors of that day, the connection into current events and events that have happened before and since.
Yeah, the first half of the book is kind of your normal 9/11 conspiracy stuff. It's the second half that is really something special. It covers a lot of Christopher Bolin's research into who was behind 9/11, and then more importantly, I think you connect it to the whole anti-Semitism industry, the Israeli tech dominance, the Sabbatean Frankist, 5G, the tech takeover, vaccines, the technocracy, technological dictatorship that's coming, which you and I both agree they're planning on running it from Jerusalem, from Beersheba. Your thoughts on some of that?
Well, I mean, there's a part of the book towards the end which has a section in one chapter which I think is called "In His Own Words," and this is basically Netanyahu talking at tech conferences and to AIPAC and in various other situations where he's basically telling you, I mean, you know, when you talk to people and you say, "Did you know that?" and you give them some facts, they invariably didn't know that. And if they did, they would see the world and world events in a completely different way. So the idea of the anti-Semitism industry and the protection racket, as I call it, is to stop that information getting to people so they can have that reevaluation of the way they see the world and world events. And what we've had, which has kept what is happening in Beersheba, this Israeli military tech complex, which is designed to be the center of the, with other elements out of Israel, the center of this global smart grid. You know, people look at things today, I mean, almost everything has smart in front of it. And the reason for that is that everything smart, whether it's technology or whether it's a system called smart, is designed to be part of this smart grid. And a fundamental foundation of it is the so-called Internet of Things, where all technologies are increasingly connected to the internet, and he who controls the internet therefore controls those technologies. And as I've talked about in previous books, and absolutely it fits into this one and what we're talking about now, people in the, what I would say is Israel-controlled Silicon Valley, and when I say Israel, I mean the network and the cult that controls Israel, not every Israeli or nothing like.
Many of them were just busted connected to Epstein, even. The Google founders, yes. Elon Musk, right.
Yeah, I mean, they control Silicon Valley. And this protection racket, therefore, given that the circulation and communication of information worldwide is dominated by the internet, and it's dominated by near monopolistic corporations like Google owned YouTube, Facebook, etc. If you control them, you fundamentally control the communication of information to vast numbers of the human race. And so we have a situation now where the same network is following an agenda ultimately to create a centralized global dictatorship. We're going there so fast, but it's also controlling the suppression of information to expose what's being done. So what you do, and controlling the exposure of what you do, is now increasingly controlled by the same people. And the protection racket mantra is anti-Semitism. And one of the things I look at, absolutely central to what I'm talking about, is this new definition of anti-Semitism. A definition, well, first of all, anti-Semitism is a misnomer because Semitism relates to a language group in the Middle East, the overwhelming vast majority of which are Arabic languages. But just put that aside, the definition of anti-Semitism should surely be, as it should be for any cultural group, that is hatred of that group for being a member of that group. And obviously that's insane and completely unsupportable. So on that level, I would be the first in line to say that that is outrageous and shouldn't be happening. But that's not what the new definition of anti-Semitism is all about. It's about expanding that to criticism of Israel and more. You know, I've been on this road a long time, 30 years now, full time, since I started this journey of research and exposure. And I've seen it all. And I've seen the steps, what I call the totalitarian tiptoe, step by step, more and more towards a tyrannical totalitarian world. And I've seen this constant expansion of the term anti-Semitism. And we've now reached the point, as you will well know, where just talking about a global conspiracy without mentioning anyone responsible for it is now called anti-Semitism, because you are engaging in this thing you hear all the time now. You never used to hear it before, but now you hear it all the time. You are engaging in an anti-Semitic trope. That's the line. So if you're saying there's a global conspiracy, people have said that the global conspiracy is run by Jewish people, therefore you're talking about a global conspiracy, therefore you're anti-Semitic. And what you're seeing all the time is this expansion and expansion of what is defined as anti-Semitism. And it's for one reason: to constantly expand the range of things that you can censor in terms of exposure in the name of anti-Semitism. That's why I call it a protection racket. It's not a protection racket to protect Jewish people from discrimination. And you can see that very clearly because you look at any Jewish people who criticize Israel. They get the treatment, the abuse, even more than non-Jewish people do. Because it's much easier to label non-Jewish people anti-Semitic and say they're only doing it for that. But it's not that easy to do it to a Jewish person, although bizarrely they try. And when you've got, like in this country, in the opposition Labour Party, there's been a real focus of this protection racket in the last few years. When you get a situation where, because of this expanded definition of anti-Semitism, you have Jewish people being thrown out of the Labour Party for anti-Semitism, you know you're not looking at something that's about protecting Jewish people from discrimination. You're looking at something that's protecting a cabal from exposure. Just very quickly, we've got a guy in this country called Chilson. I mentioned him in the book. He was born in Israel. He was conscripted into the Israeli Defense Forces. He stayed on for a while and acted in a PR role, as I understand it, from what he said, showing foreign journalists around. And he fought in the war with Lebanon in 1982. And then he started to realize how Palestinians are treated. So he rebelled against that and he thought, I'm getting out of here. And he moved to Britain. And when he did, he's an academic at Oxford University, I think now. When he did, he thought, is there a political party that I can join that could be a vehicle for me to protest about the way Palestinians are treated in Israel-Palestine? And he joined the Labour Party. Well, because of the expanded definition of anti-Semitism, which has been adopted by the Labour Party, and the backbone deletion nature of the Labour Party hierarchy these days, he was expelled from the Labour Party for anti-Semitism. So this is the nonsense, the extremes to which this has reached now. And like I say, it's nothing to do with protecting Jewish people from discrimination. I'm all for protecting anyone from discrimination. It's about protecting this cabal from exposure. And this is why more and more and more people are self-censoring and silencing themselves because they are frightened of the consequences of saying what they know to be true. And I've always had this, Adam, this way of looking at the world, which is that, you know, I am consciousness, we're all consciousness. I'm having a brief sojourn of experience in this reality, which is only a narrow band of frequencies that we call the world. And therefore, what happens to me in this 70 years and 10, or whatever you want to call it, is almost irrelevant, just an experience. And so I'm not intimidated by consequences, because don't take them into account. I'm interested in what's true and what isn't true, and first of all, uncovering it and then communicating it. I don't think, as you'll see, having read The Trigger, a lot of people would have looked at that book, if they were the writers of it, and said, ooh, dear, what's going to happen to me if I publish this? That process does not pass through my mind, except out of interest. I would rather react to this. But in terms of not doing it because of, oh, what are the consequences for me, doesn't enter the equation. And that is a power. It's a power. You have that power, and many other people, not enough, but other people have that power. The power that comes with not giving a damn what people think of you and what people do about you or say about you. Your focus is what is true. Can I support that with facts? Yes. Okay. There you go. And this is something that the cabal, the network, the protection racket doesn't know how to deal with, because its currency of control is intimidation and fear of consequences. And what they'll obviously try to do is demonize me and to shut me down. In fact, you know, my son's just told me just before we started this interview that Facebook today has contacted him and said that they have gone back through years of my Facebook page and deleted lots of stuff and warned that my Facebook page is basically about to be deleted. And this is in the wake of the publication of The Trigger a few days ago. So, you know, just a coincidence, nothing to worry about.
So you're looking at almost a million people that you're not going to be reaching if they shut down your Facebook page. Not to mention Facebook, I'm sure, has already restricted your reach without paying thousands of dollars for every post as well.
Well, I can confirm that for sure, because about 4 years ago, maybe 5 now, my Facebook page numbers got up to about 700,000-800,000, and they were increasing by 3,000 or 4,000 a week. And then they stopped overnight and have basically not moved on. And you get the same shadow banning with YouTube. And this is the point, you see. What we've got to understand is how few people we're talking about. The Jewish population of the world is 0.2%. Depending on how you define a Jewish person, the mean figure number is about 16 million out of 7.7 billion. The people that I'm exposing not only are a tiny fraction of that number, at their core, a handful, ultimately, they are not Jewish in the sense of people perceiving what a Jewish person is. They are satanic occultists, and they actually hate Jewish people. That's the irony. And that's why I say in the book, no one needs to read this book more urgently than Jewish people, so they can see the scale to which they have been shafted generation after generation after generation, and taught from birth by their system that the rest of the world hates them. Well, I've got some good news for them. We don't. One or two people might, who've lost the plot in terms of understanding the nature of reality, but the vast overwhelming majority of people do not. But you look at any situation, Adam, where the few want to control the many, and the few are always in search of a monster, of a bogeyman. If you want to frighten people into invading or justifying the invasion of Iraq, one of the other things that came from this trigger of 9/11, then tell them that Saddam Hussein has weapons of mass destruction. Tell them that Iran could do this to them and nuke their country and all this. Tell them this thing. You want a monster that you can gather support behind you to focus upon the monster, to unite behind you. And what this cult, and that's what it is, that's behind Israel, and the vast majority of Jewish people have no idea. They think the people running it are like them. They're not. The book exposes that. What it's done is turn the almost entirety of the rest of the human race into the bogeyman, into the monster, into the focus of fear. And if people in Israel, and many do, only realized how they're being perceptually manipulated from cradle to grave, they might realize that actually we don't hate them and we don't want ill for them, but we do want justice for a group of people who've been abused mercilessly since before 1948.
Absolutely. You know, you're really preaching to the choir at my channel with this book. You cover so many of the same topics, and I just want to quickly give you a lot of credit. You know, one of the videos that you did years and years and years ago, you've been covering it over the years. Rothschild Zionism was the video, and that was a big wake up moment for me when you just pointed out that was back, I think, during the Bush administration too. It was the same with the Bushes, Obama, and then even more so with Trump. And also another little secret, I have here the book The Biggest Secret that I read many years ago. You know, I first learned about you on YouTube, but I remember seeing you a lot on InfoWars. You used to go on Alex Jones's show. You guys protested there at Bilderberg together, I think, a few times. Paul Joseph Watson, Alex Jones's sidekick, even said, oh, it was one time?
Yeah, in England at Watford in, I think it's 2010.
Paul Joseph Watson of InfoWars even admitted in an interview that it wasn't Alex Jones that woke him up first, but it was you and your books. I'm a huge critic of Alex Jones for him covering up all of the Zionist info that's in this book. And I was so happy to see you actually mentioning him by name a few times in here. And then I just want to read two sentences from your book here, and then I'll let you respond. It says, the ultra-Zionist attack on Jones was a particularly bizarre on the face of it because the Jones associate they mention, Paul Joseph Watson, rails against the impact of Islam, but has argued against any suggestion of a, quote, Jayish plot. Jones overwhelmingly avoids the Zionist connection too. So I was so happy to see you call out Alex Jones. What are your thoughts on Jones and how awful he's shilling for Trump and covering up Zionism lately?
Well, for me, I you know, put my hands up to anyone that steps out and wants to expose what's going on in the world. And Alex Jones has done some very, very good things over the years in alerting a lot of people to the fact that the world is not actually run by the forces that appear to be in control. And on that, round of applause for me. Anybody that does that. Jeff Rense has been doing it as well for a long, 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 long time.
Let me pause you there, David. I have to restart the call. Your voice and your audio is all out of whack, and I want this to be good. Let me call right back, okay?
Okay. Jeff Rense is another one who's been on the case for a very long time. I first met Jeff when I was on a speaking tour of America, talking to nobody, basically, in the 1990s. Way back in the 1990s. So I say round of applause to anyone that's made a contribution to people seeing that the world is not run by the people that appear to be running it. But I would just say that I find it sad that Alex went down the road of Donald Trump. First of all, because I think it's the role of the alternative media to expose how the system is rigged and not to jump on the bandwagon of or get behind a particular politician, especially someone running for the presidency. Because if you, year after year, decade after decade, as people like me have, and Alex before, say that the system is rigged and it doesn't matter who you vote for, the cabal gets in, then how come you're behind a candidate that obviously couldn't have got there unless he was a cabal man? When you think, Adam, that Hillary Clinton got the nomination for the 2016 election, because the hierarchy of the Democratic Party, clearly shown from WikiLeaks documents, basically shafted Bernie Sanders. So the hierarchy of political parties has the power to dictate the candidate very clearly and has done many times. Donald Trump, as I recall, started out on the road to win the nomination in the Republican Party with 16 other people. And, Donald Trump, like all these politicians, Donald Trump will be up there with any of them, has not only got skeletons in the cupboard, he's got whole cemeteries. So if there was a true desire to stop his candidacy, then it would have been stopped. And he wouldn't have come through a field of professional Republicans as an outsider and won the nomination and then won the election. It wouldn't have happened. And for me, Donald Trump was brought in for a number of reasons, and here's two of them. One, he is owned by this cult. I'm not saying he's an insider of it. I'm saying he's owned by it, which is basically operated out of Israel. That's why from the moment he became president, Israel could do what it liked in terms of more and more illegal settlements on Palestinian land. That's why the American embassy was moved from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. That's why he's now talking about a new defense pact with Israel, as if they haven't got one already. Mm-hmm. It's because he's owned by Israel. And you look at two Trump employees, a bankruptcy lawyer, David Friedman, ultra Zionist, he becomes U.S. ambassador to Israel, actually Israel's ambassador to Israel, if the truth be told. Then you've got Greenblatt, who said he's now stepping down as his international negotiator of the deal with the Palestinians they want to scam them with. You look at his Treasury Secretary running the economy, and that's Steve Mnuchin, ultra-Zionist. And so he's owned by Israel. And Israel, of course, as I explained in the book in great detail, wanted 9/11. When I say Israel, I keep, every time I say Israel, I mean this cult, this government, a cult that runs Israel. They wanted 9/11 to justify the triggering of a series of regime changes, which they'd named, of course, in September 2000 with their Project for the New American Century. And ever since, they've been picking them off. So Bush and Blair pick off Afghanistan and then Iraq. And by the way, Ehud Barak, former prime minister of Israel and head of military intelligence, within no time, on the morning of 9/11, was on the BBC pointing the finger at Afghanistan and Osama bin Laden. Problem, reaction, solution. With problem, reaction, solution, you've got to get your villain in early, your fake villain in early, so that then dominates who did it from then on. And so then you move to a Democrat in Obama. Ooh, the opposite to Republican Bush. Oh, it's going to be different now. And we had David Cameron, the Prime Minister of Britain here, different to Blair, different party. It's going to be different now. And then they pick off Libya and Syria that were also on the list of the Project for the New American Century in September 2000. And now you've got the Trump administration. Oh, that's different. He's a maverick. Focusing on Iran and other countries that were on the list. So you can see the progression from we want these countries regime change to the trigger that started it to the attempts to regime change those countries, some of them successful. And the other reason they wanted Trump in was to divide and rule America. They want a civil war in America. I'm not being wise after current events. This was in my last book, which was before Trump was elected. I wrote that. They want a civil war. And to do that, you need sides. And what we're looking at in America and globally is the emergence of a new form of Marxism. Marxism, of course, as I talk about in the book, came from Karl Marx. And Karl Marx was just a front man for this death cult that currently runs Israel, also runs Saudi Arabia, and goes way back into history. And he was their boy. And, you know, you look at politics in America now, and it's polarized exactly as it was meant to be. You've got Trump, and then you've got the so-called progressives. The progressives are increasingly talking about something called socialism. And socialism is a don't scare the children version of communism. It's centralization of power and dictating the fine detail of people's lives from the center point. And it's played off against capitalism, which is controlling people's lives from a central point by control of money. One is called a government of the people, communism, socialism. The other one's called capitalism. But the structures may be slightly different, but the outcome is exactly the same. You have a few people at the top in capitalism controlling through money control and domination, and in communism, socialism, a few people at the top of the hierarchy of the political system dictating the fine detail of people's lives from a central point. And so what we've got in America increasingly now, and this was all part of bringing Trump to power, I suggest, is playing these two basically mirrors of each other, the few controlling either way, against each other. So you have this focus of attention on Trump, and this is really kind of relevant because there was an ultra-Zionist guy called a community organizer in Chicago who wrote books on how to bring down the establishment, if you like. And the key one was focus attention on a single individual. Guy was called Alinsky, by the way, and he came from the same community that Obama appeared out of, and he was a community organizer. So the idea, he said, was focus on an individual. Don't focus on a bureaucracy or corporations or anything like that. You want an individual. And that focus, it's like the Nazis used to say, keep your propaganda simple so people will be able to follow it. And so what they've done with Trump is they brought him to power as a symbol of hatred by the other side of the potential planned civil war that's already verbal and slightly physical. They want a total physical civil war if they can. And so you've got this man now who is standing there. He's the focus of hatred by the other side. And it's not about policy anymore. What's about this policy and what about that policy? It's basically politics has become, do you love Trump or hate Trump? It's completely polarized American society. I've been there a few times since Trump was elected. It's extraordinary, the polarization that's gone on. And it's been done systematically. So Trump has played a role in this cabal's agenda that's very, very, very central, both by giving Israel everything it wants, and secondly, by being this figure of hatred that can divide American society. And so I think those in the alternative media that supported Trump because they believed he was the man need to reevaluate. A lot of them already have. And I would say to this to them and everyone else, the easiest way to get scammed is by people telling you what you want to hear. Do you think when someone's coming to sell you a vacuum cleaner or something, that they're going to tell you what you don't want to hear? When they're selling you a car, are they going to tell you what you don't want to hear? No, they're going to tell you what you do want to hear. They're going to tell you, they're not going to tell you what you don't want to hear. And so what Trump did very well was articulate many of the things that, if you like, the Christian patriot wing of the alternative media in America wanted to hear. And so many bought it. But it was just for effect to gather this whole constituency behind him. But if you look at what he's done, he's not done what he said he would do at all. And, where was Alex, or more to the point, where was Donald Trump when Alex was dumped by all these social media Silicon Valley corporations? Where was Trump for him? It's question. Not words that make a difference. It's actions. Where's Trump in terms of defending the alternative media from this hysteria of censorship? Nowhere. I'll say a few words here and there. Action, zilch.
Kushner's meeting with all of them privately.
Yeah, people like Peter Thiel, his advisor on tech. He's one of the major people involved in the Silicon Valley tech industry, producing technology of surveillance, etc., for the CIA and others of their ilk. So I look at Trump, I hear the words, and I see the actions, and they're not the same.
Right.
And
I completely agree, David. He was
what
giving.
happens when you support politicians instead of exposing the rigged system.
Right. Yeah, I completely agree. They were using Cambridge Analytica to get the right talking points to win over the undecided voters, the on the fence voters, the conspiracy movement, the Alex Jones people.
Yep.
They were dog whistling. He was doing demagoguery, telling people what they wanted to hear. And I also agree that he's the figurehead and the poster boy for the hatred and the divide and conquer. Except it's not Zionists that are being blamed for what Trump does. It's white Christian men that are being scapegoated for all of this. And also, the dialectic, the false paradigm with the left and the right. We see Antifa, which supports Israel and is controlled by the same hidden hand, and then we have like these marches. There's the Proud Boys, which actually marches with the Jewish Defense League and is also incredibly Zionist. And then the dialectic with the Soros, the Sarsours, and the Squad versus Trump. What's your take on them? You say Soros is Zionist-controlled opposition in the book.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think, before we go any further, let me just define what I'm exposing in the book very quickly, and then I'll come to Soros, which will be relevant to that. I'm exposing in the book not a Jewish plot, because I know lots of Jewish people. I've come across lots of Jewish people in my life, and they haven't got a clue what's being done in their name. And then you've got the ultra-Zionists. Some of them will be part of this cult, and some of them, probably most of them, will have simply been so programmed to believe in the my country, right or wrong, anything that's good for Israel must be supported.
The chosen lie also, you say.
All that stuff. I go into that in the book. Mm-hmm. And so at the core, where it's really coming from, where they really know what's happening and why, is very, very few. And like I say, they're not Jewish as we would perceive Jewish. They are a death cult. They are a satanic cult that goes back at least to the time of the 17th century, and a guy called Sabbatai Zevi, who said he was the Jewish Messiah. And, a lot of people watching this program, because of your work over the years, will be aware of much of this anyway. But for those who are not, and this cult of Zevi decided they were going to invert everything that Jewishness and Judaism up to that point had stood for. Invert everything. So if the orthodoxy was that on this day it's a day of fasting, to this cult, which became known as Sabbateans, it would be a day of feasting. Now, that doesn't sound too bad, but then you start inverting everything else, and you start then inverting beliefs to the point where not only is sex with children not taboo, it's encouraged because it's an inversion. And in their mind, in the core of this cult, it was only a sales pitch, but many of the people that followed it believed it. The idea was that it was redemption through sin. In other words, you do more and more evil, as much evil as you can. And basically, the more evil you do, the quicker God will come and sort the world out, to put it in its basic form. And this Sabbatean cult and Sabbatai Zevi got at one point around 1 million followers. Now, you just think how many Jewish people there are in the world now. Think how many there were in the 17th century, and he had 1 million of them. I mean, that's a big chunk.
I heard it was half. I heard it was about half of the Jewish.
That would make sense from the numbers, yeah. And so what then happened is he was operating in Ottoman Empire-controlled Turkey, and the Sultan gave him an ultimatum: you either convert and your followers to Islam, otherwise you ain't going to be around very long. And he considered it, not for very long, I would think, and said, okay, we'll convert. But he didn't convert, except on the surface. They outwardly worshipped as Muslims, but they were really following their Sabbatean religion, cult, in private, in secret. And these people became known as the Donmer or Donmer, which means to turn. And these Donmer went on expanding, and their great technique was infiltration. Of course, they'd now infiltrated Islam through this fake conversion. But later they started infiltrating the Roman Catholic Church. They manifested in southern states of America as Christian Zionism, etc.
Freemasonry.
And talk about in the book, one of the ways they manifested this Donmer eventually was as the Saudi Arabian royal family. And the Saudi Arabian royal family were put into power by the British Empire. And the British Empire, in league with the Saudi House of Saud, introduced a guy called Wahhab, and Wahhab's daughter married into the Saudi royal family. And from Wahhab came the extreme head-chopping, arm-chopping version of Islam called Wahhabism, which is ISIS, which is what? Saudi Arabia today, run by the Saudi royal family. And this is why, in the shadows, the Saudi royal family and the other aspect of the cult in Israel have been very close. And even since the emergence of this crown prince psychopath, Mohammed bin Salman, in Saudi Arabia, it's actually been more even on the surface. And this Sabbatean cult then went into even new depths of depravity in the 18th century when a guy called Jacob Frank appeared, claiming that he was the reincarnation of Sabbatai Zevi and the reincarnation of the biblical patriarch Jacob. And he took this whole thing into overdrive, not least in infiltrating the Roman church. And then at another point in the 1700s, sorry, the 18th century, Jacob Frank got together with the founder of the Rothschild dynasty, Mayer Amschel Rothschild, who got together, both of them, with a guy called Adam Weishaupt, and they created what became known as the Illuminati. And the Illuminati became a front for this, what was then Sabbatean Frankism, this cult. And they moved in on Palestine in the way that we've seen. I mean, you look at the Balfour Declaration during the First World War, when the Foreign Secretary of Britain, Lord Arthur Balfour, made the declaration that the British Empire supported a homeland for Jewish people in Palestine. And you find, when you scratch away the official story, that there was a secret society in London started by the Rothschilds called the Round Table. The first head of it was a guy called Cecil Rhodes, who plundered Southern Africa for the Rothschilds. And the Balfour Declaration was actually a letter from Lord Balfour, Foreign Secretary, an inner circle initiate of the Round Table Secret Society, to the funder of the Round Table Secret Society, Lord Rothschild. And the letter was almost certainly written by a guy called Alfred Milner, who was a Rothschild-connected banker, who by that time was the head of the Round Table Secret Society. From that secret society, by the way, that Round Table, was spawned the Council on Foreign Relations in America in 1921, the Bilderberg Group in 1954, the Trilateral Commission in 1972, 73, etc. And so by now we're in the 20th century. This whole cult is now expanding itself into Israel, across Europe, into America, and this vast network of manipulation and funding, this vast network of ultra-Zionist groups, most famously AIPAC, in the end are expressions of this Sabbatean Frankist cult, which has been expanding its power through the centuries to present day. And the sources that I've quoted in the book about all this and the Sabbatean Frankist cult and its gathering area of control are actually Jewish sources. Because there are people in the Jewish community, not nearly enough, but there are some, who absolutely know what I've just described is true. So when people say that Icke says it's a Jewish plot, that's exactly what I'm not saying. That's why I say Jewish people in general need to read this book, The Trigger, more urgently than anyone to see actually who's controlling them. I'm exposing a network of interlopers that have infiltrated the Jewish community and control Israel, that have infiltrated Islam via the Saudi royal family, that have infiltrated Christianity via Christian Zionism, and so on and so forth. It goes on.
But at the core of all of this, wouldn't you say it's essentially the Bible and biblical prophecy? You wouldn't have a Sabbatai Zevi and a Jacob Frank if there wasn't the prophecies for them to return to Jerusalem and build the temple and then have their Moshiach come. So isn't it just kind of like a twisted interpretation of Judaism?
Yeah, what I do in the book is I make clear that this, what I call hidden hand network, this global web, goes back a long, long time, way beyond Sabbatai Zevi. I mean, you've got the Knights Templar that were created in the 12th century that also had the goal of rebuilding Solomon's temple in Jerusalem, which is what this moving of the embassy is all about. That's where it's leading. That's why they want to clear out that part of Jerusalem of Muslim people, because that's where they want to go, to the rebuilding of Solomon's temple. I go into all that in the book, especially in relation to this smart grid, etc. So yes, this goes back much further than this cult. But when you pick it up and you follow it through to present time, this cult has become a massively central and important part of this global web of manipulation and control, which is not only focused in Israel and this network we're talking about now. It's much wider than that. But this is a fundamentally important part of it in terms of current events and events of the 20th century and beyond.
There was certainly like a fork in the road of Judaism. They changed their ideology when they decided that they were going to start doing everything they could to fulfill prophecies on their own. Before that, they were supposed to wait for the very clear Moshiach to come to lead them back. So now it's self-fulfilling prophecy. That's kind of a little bit of the difference they have. But at the core, don't they...
You're absolutely right. Just very quickly, Adam, you're absolutely right. Once you have a blueprint and people believe that this is prophecy, I mean, look how the Christians and the Christian Zionists are manipulated by belief in prophecy. Because then when you're a manipulator, as you rightly identify, all you've got to do is manipulate those prophecies to appear to be happening, and they'll all come with you because they think God's doing it. You're absolutely right. That's exactly what's going on.
And, you know, with Trump, they're putting him on the coin and they're moving the capital to Jerusalem. The Sanhedrin is calling for the United Nations to be dissolved and have a new, the law must come forth from Zion. So they're trying to fulfill all of this. And in the book, you do such a great job covering the Israeli tech dominance and their agenda with AI and all the rest of it. I wanted to show this article to you to make sure that you've seen this. I think I remember you sharing it. You can see my screen, right?
Yeah.
BBC. Where's the headline?
Yeah, I've got it.
Smartphone users warned to be careful of the Antichrist. So, can you explain a little bit about how they're going to be able to pull off this world government and complete domination with the advanced tech agenda?
Well, I've been attacked over decades for mentioning the protocols of the Elders of Zion, and I mentioned them first of all for one simple reason. I hadn't got into all this stuff at the time. Well, I'm going way back into the 90s. And the reason I mentioned them was quite simple, to say that what they predict has actually happened and is happening. So how come? As I was saying, in those days, were they written by just an extraordinary prophet, or did someone just get extraordinarily lucky? I mean, look at what's happened and what they say they're going to do. And as I've understood more, it's become clear to me that what these protocols are, and I'm quite open to the fact that what we see is not the original protocols, but a version of them, probably a cut down version of them. And people say it was a forgery. Well, it was a forgery of what? Because a forgery is a forgery of something else. So the more that I've understood the deeper, wider aspects of all this, the more it's become clear to me that the protocols of the Elders of Zion are not a Jewish plot agenda. They are a Sabbatean Frankist death cult agenda. And by the way, just before we move on, as I pointed out in previous books and emphasize again in this, the protocols of the Elders of Zion, one of the big red flags of that is if you mention them, then you're immediately subject to a deluge of abuse. You're a Nazi, or this, that, and the other. And what people say is you can't talk about them because they were shown to be a forgery by the Times newspaper in 1921. And you talk about people on the left, they'll say that. Oh, no, they were shown to be a forgery. Well, when you look into that, those Times newspaper articles also appeared in the New York Times, on which the protocols were a forgery and, made up, basically, on which that is based. Those articles were written by a British military intelligence agent called Philip Graves. And he worked with a guy called T.E. Lawrence, the famous Lawrence of Arabia, of course, the famous movie. And what did Lawrence of Arabia do? He was a British military operative, and his role was to manipulate the Arab people of Palestine during the First World War to join the British in kicking the Ottoman Empire out of those lands. And what Lawrence did to achieve this was promise what we'll call the Palestinians, that they would have rights to self-determination on that land once the Ottoman Empire was removed. Now, Lawrence, of course, knew that wasn't true. He knew that they wanted to get rid of the Ottoman Empire so that the door was opened for Israel to be created, as it eventually was in 1948. So getting rid of the Ottoman Empire was very, very important. And the guy who produced a Russian emigre, which was the Philip Graves' source in those articles for the fact that the protocols were a forgery, was Alan Dulles. Mm-hmm. Alan Dulles, the first head of the CIA, civilian head of the CIA, and a man who was up to his neck in intrigue and mendacity his entire career. And he was operating at that time in a diplomatic role in Turkey, and produced this emigre, never named. And the emigre was given a loan by the Times newspaper, which was not expected to be paid back. And this is how those articles came about. But you say to that, Adam, to anybody, or ask the question of anybody that says the protocols, they were shown to be a forgery and not to be taken seriously. You ask them, well, how did those articles come about? And they won't be able to tell you. But that's how they came about. So I'm interested in the truth, not a statue and a round of applause. And therefore, in the book, I've looked at these protocols and what they say, not as a proof of a Jewish plot. I'm not talking about a Jewish plot. I'm talking about the Sabbatean Frankist death cult plot. And what you find is they talk about basically a world king ruling the world from Jerusalem, Israel. And of course, this is something that I've made absolutely clear many times over the years, because it's really, really important to know. So many pennies drop when you realize this. There is a level of knowledge in the mainstream public arena that the population in general see and are aware of. And therefore, they believe that that is the cutting edge of human knowledge. Like technology, what the cutting edge of technology in the public arena is the cutting edge of technology. No, it's not. Because in the secret underground projects and the secret bases, technology is light years above and ahead of what we see in the public arena. And they're putting it into the public arena in a particular sequence with cover stories telling you it's just been invented when it's actually been known about for a long, long time. And then there's another level of knowledge which this hidden hand secret society network death cult has. And that knowledge is way, way beyond anything that people see in the public arena. And anyone that wants to bring that knowledge into the public arena, they're either ridiculed as mad or crazy or dangerous and all this stuff. And it's abused and discredited because they don't want the public to know what they know. And it may sound fantastic to people listening to this, and well, it will have to. But when back in the 20th century, they were talking in the hidden about a world king and the world being ruled from Israel. They knew how it was going to be done. Whereas the members of the public in human society at that time, how it was going to be done was via technology they would have thought was fantasy and impossible, except that now, all these decades later, it's part of human life and everyday life, that technology. But they knew about it then. This is the two levels of knowledge, one in the hidden and one in the public arena. So the more that the technological focus, the cutting edge of technological development has started to focus upon Israel, the more how this world king ruling from Israel becomes explainable. And it locks into something that I've been exposing in my books and talks and videos, etc., for so long. And that's the plan to create this smart grid. Tell you how fast things are moving. I remember writing in books not that long ago that we need to watch, because the plan is to bring in an Internet of Things where all technologies, like even your domestic appliances are connected to the internet. And now it's commonplace. Billions of items are connected to the internet. And whoever controls the internet controls those items. And what we're seeing now out of Silicon Valley, and you know, people like Elon Musk, who tells you that artificial intelligence could be the end of humanity, brackets true, and then starts a company called Neuralink to connect computers to the human brain. I mean, hello. And has he ever explained that? I'm not sure he's ever been asked about it. And then you've got Ray Kurzweil, another ultra-Zionist, a executive of Google, who's actually put a year on it. By 2030, artificial intelligence, which basically runs the internet now, and is increasingly running more and more of human life, increasingly even your car, and all that technology in your car, you know, as we go closer and closer to driverless cars, that's all being made in Israel. And Kurzweil saying that by 2030, the human brain will be connected to artificial intelligence. So these are his words, not mine. That once that connection's made, more and more of human thinking will be done by AI until human thinking as we currently experience it will be virtually negligible. That's his words. And then you start to see this concentration of global technological power and smart grid power in Israel, and the creation of this massive center at Beersheba, which is run by the military, which is completely focused on controlling cyberspace and controlling AI and controlling this communication grid I call the smart grid. At the same time, all these major Silicon Valley companies, your Facebooks and your major tech companies, your Intels and your Microsofts, all of these major technology AI companies, their research and development is being moved to Israel around this Beersheba complex, this massive Beersheba complex, which is controlled by the military. And it's out of there, by the way, that when you say anything on social media that is in any way criticizing Israel, you get this backlash. Well, a lot of them that are posting those comments against you are actually wearing uniforms in Israel, Beersheba.
Absolutely. The Matrix, you write in the book, the Matrix calls it the Zion mainframe. I had missed that. I didn't realize that. And you also write about 5G a lot. I'm wondering, have you seen the movie The Kingsman?
No, not yet.
The plot of that is a group of billionaires use the new cell phone towers to put out a frequency to cause everybody to kill each other.
Well, I've written about that, Adam, at length in my books. I mean, I've researched so many different subjects, and they all connect. And one of the fundamental subjects to research, to understand the nature of what's happening, is the nature of human thought, human emotion, even the nature of what is the human I. In other words, who are we? What is this reality that we're experiencing? But if you merely take the brain, what the brain is a processor of information. And it works electrically, electromagnetically, and in terms of frequency, vibration. And if you are communicating information within the brain's frequency band in a form that it can decode, same with the genetic structure in general, you will start impacting upon and dictating perception. I've shown in some of my books how research has been done that has identified particular frequencies that if you broadcast them, they will basically bring the people that receive them into a state of rage. I mean, you can do this once you understand how reality works. And 5G is being brought in with no testing. I don't know whether you saw the question that a group of people who were some of the big bods of the telecommunications industry were asked on Capitol Hill in hearings about 5G. They were asked, how much money have you spent on independent testing into the physical effects of 5G? Never mind the psychological effects, which are just as important. And the answer was nothing, not a penny. It's been brought in all around the world with no testing, because if it was independently tested and those results were publicly published, then 5G would never get the chance of being used. But 5G, because of the frequency band that it's in, it's a new frequency band. It's not an expanded, more powerful version of 4G. It's a different part of the electromagnetic spectrum. And it's also very much more powerful. And they need at least 5G to run this smart grid. And like I say, when I started seeing this concentration of power, and also, as I mentioned earlier, Netanyahu openly bragging to choir audiences that this is what basically they were doing. They were becoming the technological power center of the world. Then how they could control the world from Israel, as the protocols say, became technologically understandable. Because once you have an AI connection to the human brain, and you have an AI connection to all human technology via the internet, then you can control all of it from a central point from which you dictate the frequencies that you are transmitting. Therefore, it becomes technologically possible to control an entire human society globally from a central point. I mean, look to an extent now, even on the communication level, that small area of land called Silicon Valley, how much power that has globally over human perception. We're not even talking yet about a direct connection. We're still talking about control of information from which people form perceptions. We've not gone the next stage yet, which is you getting your perceptions direct via AI. But even now, look at the power that small area of America, Silicon Valley, has over human perception. Now perceive what would be possible if from a central point you had a connection to every human mind, every human brain. And by the way, to bring about this smart grid, they have to have every inch of planet Earth covered by an internet connection, an AI connection, if you like. And that's why, here we go again, led by Elon Musk and his SpaceX, thousands of satellites are going up to beam the cloud, as Kurzweil calls it, to every inch of the planet. They're creating what's called the smart grid. I was calling in my books decades ago the technological sub-reality. It's what it is. It's creating a technological sub-reality. Call it a simulation, if you like.
Yeah, virtual world.
Yeah, connecting to the human brain. And that's why people like Kurzweil and all these other people are talking about people living their lives more and more through, quote, virtual reality. What they mean by virtual reality is simply a reality that they control and dictate. That's where we're going. And that's why, even though I know what the reaction will be by this cult and its gophers to the trigger, I wrote it anyway. not thinking of consequences. Consequences, I'm 67, okay? I'm going to be around a long time yet, but I ain't going to be around as long as a 20-year-old and a 15-year-old and a 10-year-old. And when I look at my grandkids and my kids, and I look at everyone else's grandkids and kids, and even people relatively getting on in years still, I look at the world they are going to live in unless backbones get stiffened and self-censorship starts deleting, and we start looking this in the eye and circulating this information of where we're going. Because, coming back, and the dots connect the more you speak, this same network that's doing all this to this end is also controlling, through the expanded definition of anti-Semitism and through control of Silicon Valley, they are controlling the fact that not only are they doing what they're doing, they're controlling and suppressing the exposure of what they're doing. And so when I bring out the trigger, and within days, Facebook, controlled by the cult ultimately, says we're basically going to delete your page, well, that's par for the course. And you will have come across this, Adam, before, I'm sure, but I do have to smile. I come across it all the time. People say to you, you can't do that, or you can't say that. That's not true. And then they prove you're right. Mm-hmm. I got banned from Australia earlier this year, and I got the ban 4 hours before my plane left because the immigration minister, a guy called David Coleman, was told what he was going to do. And he was told what he was going to do by a guy called Abramovich, who runs a man and a dog organization in Australia called the Anti-Defamation Commission, brackets read Anti-Defamation League. And the idea was that I shouldn't be allowed into Australia because I was saying that some people have, cabal has so much power, even though they're very small in number, over countries. So I was wrong, and I should be banned for saying that. So what they did was, this cabal said to the minister, he's not coming in, and I got banned 4 hours before my plane left. So what they're doing all the time is they're saying, what you're saying is not true, and then they prove you're right. Right. Which is what Facebook's doing now with in reaction to the trigger.
In all the media over there in Australia, is most of it that was attacking you is owned by Rupert Murdoch, who many have reported is a Rothschild front, and he's obviously in the cabal. And you know what? After you got banned from Australia, I was going to bring that up when we close out here in a minute. And I loved how they brought you on the talk show because they wanted to smear you, and you wouldn't back down. They were trying to force you to use that magic number that's so important to them, and you wouldn't do it, and you wouldn't back down to their bullying. And I really respect your courage for that and for writing this incredibly important book.
Well, this is the point, Adam, and it does frustrate me, and I do mention it one or two times in the book in relation to people. If you say things and you believe they are true and you can support them with factual evidence, when you get the backlash, why do people apologize? Is what you said true? Can you back it up factually? Yeah. So why did you apologize? You see this all the time. People will, and often increasingly, because the walls close in, they're very mild comments some people make about Israel on social media or something, maybe a celebrity. And bingo, the backlash comes, not least out of Beersheba, and they start apologizing. What are you apologizing for?
Congressman Ted Lieu just did this.
But if it's true, say it, you know?
Back to the tech, you get into the book how all of this Internet of Things is going to tie on in the future with nanotech and smart dust and the Neuralinks and all this. It's incredibly dangerous stuff. And one other thing I wanted to point out that I thought was interesting, you say this is a Babylonian plot as well. It goes back they want more than just Jerusalem. They want ancient Babylon as well, which explains how the greater Israel would include Babylon there.
Well, if you follow the history back, the Babylonians came out of what is now Iraq, between the Tigris and the Euphrates, and they moved up. And there's very good evidence that they became eventually they became connected to the Khazars. From which, of course, the vast majority of Jewish people alive today come from in southern Russia, the Khazar Empire. The Babylonians also moved in and created Rome, or the people that were the successors to the Babylonians. And this is why you have the Babylonian Trinity of Nimrod, the father god, and Tammuz Ninus, the virgin-born son, and Queen Semiramis, the virgin mother. And they used to say in Babylon that when Nimrod died, he became the sun god Baal and impregnated the Queen Semiramis with the rays of the sun, and she gave a virgin birth to Tammuz Ninus. When they moved in on Rome, that eventually became the Christian Trinity of Father God, Jesus, and the Holy Ghost, the Holy Spirit. And Christians, they symbolize the Holy Spirit ghost as a dove, which was the symbol of Queen Semiramis in Babylon. So it's the same Trinity, really. And the traits given to Queen Semiramis by the Babylonians, like Virgin Mother, Queen of Heaven, and all that stuff, they were given to an invented character called Mother Mary in the rewritten Babylonian religion that became known as Christianity. And Christianity is the outward, publicly acceptable version of the Babylonian religion. So when you, for instance, you have the Eucharist, where they're eating the flesh as bread or a biscuit and drinking the blood as wine, it's just a publicly acceptable way of basically symbolizing, although most people in Christianity don't know this, symbolizing the literal eating of the flesh and drinking of the blood, which the Babylonian religion is engaged in. And because this cult, which eventually manifested as Sabbatean Frankism, but there are many other expressions of it, not just that one. The reason that they are engaged in sacrifice and all this horror in their rituals, their satanic rituals, is because it's just a continuation of the Babylonian religion. In the ancient world, because of the nature of, human maturity, if you like, they could do it openly, but now they have to do it secretly. But it's the same thing, and this is why this is why so many famous people get caught out with Satanism and with pedophilia. Those two are massively connected, as I've explained in my books why that is. And so when you come across to Epstein, Adam, you're looking at classic. We had a Jeffrey Epstein in Britain, exposed a few years ago now, called Jimmy Savile. Jimmy Savile was a record-breaking pedophile, but what the mainstream media did not cover is the real story. He was a procurer of children for the rich and famous. And he was an inner bosom circle member of the British royal family from the 1960s almost to his death, a very close friend of Prince Charles, almost to Savile's death. In fact, to Savile's death in terms of Charles. And even according to Savile himself, he was brought into the bosom, the inner circle of the British royal family, by a royal family member called Lord Mountbatten, who is a known paedophile. I've been naming him as a paedophile for a long time. And then very recently, just the last maybe 2-3 weeks, a book's been published which produces FBI documents in which they are quoting people that Lord Mountbatten was a paedophile. And so in that Savile ring, he was procuring children for the rich and famous. And of course, once people accept that, they become a blackmailer's nightmare. And many of them were politicians, including Ted Heath, a former Prime Minister of Britain that took us into the European Union. And I exposed him as a paedophile and a Satanist in The Biggest Secret while he was still an MP, and the book passage was read to him in the week of publication. He did nothing. Why? Because it was true. And 17 years after I published that book, Wiltshire police in Britain started an inquiry after his death into his paedophilia activities. And they concluded that if they if he was alive, they would have actually had him in for questioning because the evidence would have supported that. And so then you go to Epstein and you see the same principle. He's procuring young girls for the rich and famous and the politically influential. And once they've accepted it, they've had it. And, you know, you see now these women who were young girls at the time in this Epstein ring, who were saying there were hidden cameras and audio microphones all over the place because it's a blackmail ring. And then you look at his alleged madam, Ghislaine Maxwell. Ghislaine Maxwell is the daughter of an infamous Mossad operative called Bob Maxwell, her father, who was a media owner in Britain. I met him once. I interviewed him because he was an owner of a football club, and I interviewed him about his football club. One of the most unpleasant pieces of work I've ever met in my life, Robert Maxwell. And I mentioned him in the book and how he was operating in their tech covert operation, Mossad's tech covert operation, through this Promise software, which had back doors in it so that Mossad could get into computer systems in governments and military and intelligence all over the place, and corporations. And he was a Mossad agent, and here's his daughter, who's supposed to be the madam of Jeffrey Epstein, and that was again a blackmail operation. And you know that's why people are running for cover in all directions, because they don't want what they were involved in coming out.
Right. I just read recently that Robert Maxwell's last phone call was with a Chabad rabbi. You mentioned Chabad, you mentioned the Rebbe Schneerson, you mentioned Lurianic Kabbalah. I didn't see anything in the book about Noahide laws. Was that just because you didn't want to have to write a whole nother huge chapter? Or what's your quick thoughts on Noahide laws?
You know, the book's like about 850 pages.
I know, can't cover it all.
There's a list, but people should look them up. Mm-hmm. But the thing is about Maxwell is that, just to show the hypocrisy of it, mm-hmm. is he was murdered. Of course, Viktor Ostrovsky, the Mossad agent who wrote the books about Mossad, wrote a second book in which he mentioned that Maxwell was a Mossad agent, and how Mossad killed him on his boat, which was appropriately called the Lady Ghislaine, after his daughter. Because at that time, it was very well known in Britain, Maxwell's media empire was breaking up, his life was breaking up, everything was breaking up around him, and he became a liability, and they wanted rid of him. And having killed him on his boat, they then gave him a hero's funeral on the Mount of Olives. Yeah. Which just shows the hypocrisy, really, and also shows that the people running Israel have no connection really to the traditions of Judaism. They've inverted them. Everything is inverted, and they have contempt for your rank and file Jewish people, as they have contempt even for the ultra-Zionists who are not part of the cult but have bought their Israel right or wrong philosophy. They're just pawns in the game of the death cult without even realizing that that's the situation. And the death cult core will have absolute contempt for them as well. They're just pawns in the game. Same with the Christian Zionists. They will have contempt for them. They'll just be laughing at them. And we need to open our eyes and free people to get this information circulating, so that we can have a mature open debate on actually where the world's going, why, and who's actually behind it. And no one needs to know this more than Jewish people. Urgently, they do.
I absolutely agree. David, I know you got to get going. You've got other interviews to do. I hope to see you all over making the rounds, talking about all this information. I really commend your courage. And this was truly a surreal interview for me. You've been, the biggest name in alternative media. I've been watching your videos for over a decade. You're a walking encyclopedia. Thank you for taking the time. I hope we can do it again sometime. We talk about so many of the same issues. It'd be great to get you back on again soon.
Well, I'm sure, mate, there's going to be a lot to talk about because we are heading for the Endgame now, and people need to wake up to it fast. And that means putting aside consequences and just saying and doing what you know to be right. And you do that. And I've got a lot of admiration for your way of telling the truth without fearing the consequences. And if there were more people doing that, the world will be a better place and a very different place.
I fear the consequences of not speaking out as loud as I can. That's what drives it, actually. All right, David.
That's what I say to people all the time. Don't think about the consequences of doing what you know to be right. Think about the consequences of not doing it. And that, to me, as it is clearly for you, is unthinkable.
Absolutely. It's what drives me to speak out about this stuff every day. So follow on Twitter. You're under attack on Facebook. Everybody follow there as well. Sub to the website is davidicke.com. All the links will be in the description. The YouTube channel, David Icke, where you're posting videos as well. Thank you so much for coming on, David. Have a great day, and I hope to speak with you again soon.
Cheers, Adam. Bye.
All right. Take care. Bye.